So guys, the Wall Street Journal last night came out with a report that Nintendo is working on a new model of the Nintendo Switch. Now, unfortunately, the details are pretty vague. The only things the report confirms is that it's coming in the second half of 2019, potentially as soon as next summer. And beyond that, pretty much everything else is up in the air. They did mention that they are looking at potentially a better screen for it, such as one that draws lower power and looks better, similar to more recent, phone LCDs. And beyond that, though, they merely said that they're looking at whether features or hardware changes that the new Switch might have. So really, this leaves a lot of room for interpretation as to what exactly this could be. Is it going to be a Switch Mini? Is it going to be a Switch Pro? Is it going to be maybe a handheld-only Switch? Who knows? But that's what we're here to discuss, to try and figure out what it might be, or give our hopes and expectations for it. So we're of course joined by Derek, John, and also special guest Steve Bowling from Nintendo Life. So how's it going, Steve?
Hey, going pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Again.
That's right. It's an ongoing thing here. So, guys, let's get to, I guess, the most important question is, what do you think this is going to be? I think there's multiple forms it could take. I already listed a few of them. What are your expectations for what this device is coming just, about 2.5 years after the original Switch, potentially?
I think something cheaper makes more sense. I know a lot of people want a Pro unit, but a lot of 2018's games, like Pokemon and Animal Crossing, are quite family-orientated, quite a younger crowd, and I reckon it makes more sense to put a cheaper system out there, because as it is, the Switch is already quite pricey, especially compared to a 3DS. So I reckon they're probably going to have something maybe a little cheaper. But the only problem there is you can't really get rid of the Joy-Con, because games like Super Mario Party and 1-2-Switch need them. So I reckon no matter what they do, the form factor is going to have to remain pretty much the same.
So then the question is, how do you make that cheaper?
Good question. I guess part of it has to do with the Tegra chip, because I'm pretty sure that's where the piracy issue came from, the whole hacking exploit.
Right.
And that might be a reason why they're trying to accelerate this revision process to try and get past all of the homebrew stuff. So maybe changing the Tegra chip will do that, but I'm pretty sure that'll make it more expensive, because they got a good deal with the current one.
So, I have heard real quick, I haven't confirmed this, but I have heard that Nintendo has already potentially addressed that chip issue with the newer versions of the Switch coming out now. So I don't know if that's a big driver for what this new Switch might be. The Wall Street Journal did report that this seems to be an attempt by Nintendo to maintain momentum, or build momentum rather, because while sales are still solid for the Switch, they want to increase them. So yeah, that tells me that they are probably going to aim for potentially a slightly new demographic with this newer model, perhaps, as you mentioned, it being cheaper. They maybe want to reach kids, for instance. And kind of touching on what you were saying there, John, one way I think of they could potentially make it cheaper is they could use a newer version of the Tegra.
I think what it is an off-the-shelf Tegra X1, but if I remember correctly, before the Switch came out and people were doing x-rays on it and stuff like that, that they concluded that while Nintendo was saying it was custom, it really was the same thing we found in the Shield.
Right. So they're using like a newer version of it that could be smaller, also draw less power, perhaps. Actually, it would if it were smaller. But I think so. I have one thought. One way they could reduce the price, perhaps, is what if they separated it from the dock? Sell a handheld-only version of the Switch with a optional dock you buy afterward, much as you can now. I don't think taking the dock away by itself would reduce the cost of to Nintendo that much, but if they sold docks in addition to the Switch, then they might start making bank. So
that's a really good point. But they did actually pilot that in Japan already. So the Switch has been separated from the dock there for quite some time, and I don't think that it was really a game changer over there.
The problem is, I don't think it comes with a power cord without this dock in Japan.
I don't think you could buy the Switch on its own in retail stores in Japan. I'm pretty sure it's just through Nintendo's site. So if they were to make it more accessible, I think you could definitely make a good buck off of that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that's totally right. The dock is the only part of the Switch that isn't really essential. Pretty much every game works in handheld mode, and games like Pokemon really do tailor themselves to a handheld. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I definitely think gaming with the dock is a great idea, and if they could sort of redo the Switch to make it a bit more handheld friendly, maybe that's the direction they'd go for. But you really can't get rid of those Joy-Con. The Joy-Con are in the logo. They're in most of these games.
Yeah, Mario Party requires it. You can't play with anything but a Joy-Con.
Right, exactly. And a big part of the Switch is being able to share a local multiplayer experience. And if the controllers were tethered to the console, that would just ruin that marketing and that image. So I'm pretty confident they will not get rid of the Joy-Con. They will always stay attached.
That's a good point. But I've seen a lot of speculation that Nintendo might release a handheld-only model in an attempt to reach kids. And it would be cheaper. You don't have to have separate Joy-Cons with their own wireless functions. They would just be connected to the system. But yeah, that would kind of go against the entire point of the Switch, including its very name. To be fair, Nintendo 3DS also went against that with the 2DS, so it's not unheard of, but I agree, at this point it seems a little bit premature. I think it'll only cloud the marketing, because removing 3D is one thing, removing the ability entirely to play in handheld or docked form, up to your choosing, would really just cloud the marketing, I think, so...
I know Labo's not a huge thing, it could be a big thing in the future, but Labo needs the Joy-Con, it needs the IR camera. And if Joy-Con doesn't come with the system, then it's very hard to sell Labo to kids. And if we're going for a cheaper system, you kind of need to push Labo on them.
Right.
As far as going off of what John was saying about Pokemon being, handheld traditionally, that's what they sort of designed it around. They've even said that themselves with the latest one. Let's Go is designed to be a console experience, while Gen 8 next year is supposed to be more in line with the games that we've seen up to this point and is meant to be more of a handheld experience. So going along that line of thought, it does make sense to have it more handheld in nature. But I do agree completely with John. There is no way they're going to get rid of the functionality where you can slide off and on the Joy-Con. It completely goes against the design. The question is, how do you change the size of it without affecting the Joy-Con? And that's really the problem they're going to get into. So I think most of the changes we're going to see for whatever this new model of Switch is going to be mostly internal and maybe just some slight upgrades here and there. Now, of course, they need to have some kind of big hook. They always do that with their handheld systems. Look at the DS Lite, the original DS. That is a huge, huge design change. But Switch is already looking pretty sleek. DS needed that design and a lot of the upgrades that it got with the Lite version. So we might be looking at more of a DS to DSi situation, or DS Lite to DSi situation, where there's a few more features and you can kind of see where it's coming from, but it's not wholly necessary. It's just here's some features, here's some things we wanted to do, and we're still pumping out new versions into the market, so it's constantly being in people's minds.
Yeah, you might be onto something there, because the first revision of most Nintendo's handhelds before, such as with the GBSP, the DS Lite, and possibly even the 3DS XL, they all kind of addressed a big shortcoming of the original. In the GBA's case, it was adding a light. In the DS Lite's case, it was also adding a light, pretty much. And then for the 3DS, so making those screens bigger. The Switch, though, has really no major big shortcoming. I mean, battery life would probably be the closest thing possible, but it has no major weakness that the other consoles had. And as you guys have already touched on, by keeping the Joy-Cons, which I think they have to, it locks them into a very similar design. And the Switch itself is already pretty small, pretty sleek, as Derek mentioned. They can make it a little bit thinner, I guess, but I don't know you can't really sell that.
You mentioned that this could have a better screen, and I'm not sure how much of a selling point it is, but you could get rid of the bezel on the Switch. But even then, you're only adding an inch to the screen. It's not a huge selling point. This is 1 inch bigger than the previous model.
I feel like getting rid of the bezel is almost more of a selling point than the bigger screen. But yeah, I mean, you're kind of right. They could get rid of the bezel. I guess they could market it as a Switch, they wouldn't want to call it an XL because the Switch itself wouldn't change size, but the screen would be bigger. So maybe if you pair that with slightly improved, slightly increased horsepower, if it were going the DSi model. I don't know, it's weird. I don't see them going full Switch Pro with this, right? Not yet.
From what I've read, the Tegra X2 actually is more efficient than the X1, so you get a better battery life and more power. So technically, if they were to go with that chip rather than the X1, they would have a more powerful system with a better battery life, so it's pretty much better all around. But then again, that's not going for a cheaper unit, and if we were trying to get a handheld-only system, trying to sell it to kids, I don't think the X2 is the way to go with that.
Right. So to answer your question, Andre, I think that what really constitutes a Pro, first off, right, versus an upgraded model, where do you make that distinction?
It's all marketing, right? Yeah.
Right. It's all just fancy branding, but I do think that Nintendo's going to introduce a more powerful Switch next year, and the reason being is that we're kind of getting some of the PS4's runoff right now. Dragon Ball FighterZ looks fantastic on the Switch. Other games have made the jump from quote-unquote current gen consoles to the Switch, but that's going to soon become an impossibility with the introduction of whatever the heck Xbox Scarlet is and the PS5, and I can almost guarantee E3 2019 will be dominated by talk of those, and Nintendo's going to need to remain part of that conversation, by saying, hey, we're introducing something more powerful too. So I do think that the next iteration of the Switch will be some type of spec bump. I don't think it'll be the crazy stuff we've heard on the internet, like 4K video output and a dock with an extra GPU in it. That's just not going to happen. But what I do think we'll see is a marginally upgraded Switch, hopefully with a better screen, most certainly hopefully with better battery life.
Yeah, I mean, better battery would be a good thing. I feel like if there is a spec bump, which they are using if they do upgrade the X2 chip, there would be. But it is a pretty, from my understanding, I think it's a pretty modest bump. So I don't think their angle would be, hey, it's more powerful. I think it would be more a secondary bump. It's kind of like with the DSi, right? That wasn't really a big selling point. They barely took advantage of it. I guess the new 3DS has something similar too. So I do think it will be more powerful. I don't think it'll be a big improvement. I guess my take on this is I don't see them marketing as Sony has with the PS4 Pro. Like, I don't think they're selling this as like a big step up from the current Switch. Especially with if the report's accurate, if they're still finalizing features for this thing, it sounds like you would think if this is going to be a big step up that they would have that figured out or locked in by this point.
Right. If it's launching next year and it's significantly more powerful, developers would probably already be getting briefed on it.
Right, yeah.
Steve had a good point about staying in that power conversation, because there are some Switch games that are kind of pushing the system already. Like, if you look at Wolfenstein 2 The New Colossus, that game is incredible, that port. It's amazing they managed to put that on the Switch.
Yeah.
But they just barely do it, and it runs at maybe 480p a lot of the time, so clearly they were pushing it quite far. And even some Nintendo games, like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, don't look that great in a handheld mode. So maybe just being able to boost those games would be interesting, but they are kind of the exception. Because most Switch games do run pretty well. Like, pretty much all first-party Nintendo games run at a solid native resolution. So, yeah, I don't know how much of a selling point it is for just a couple of games to be enhanced. Because in reality, most Switch games are fine.
I mean, they're going to be keeping up at least for a little bit longer because Bethesda has already announced that Doom Eternal is coming to the Switch. So they're keeping up with them, and it's just a matter of how well it keeps up to a certain point. And as Steve said, once we get into next generation, it's going to be a lot harder for them to stay current. Granted, who knows how much the jump is going to be from one system to the next, but it's still going to be, I think, enough that the Switch might not be able to handle it at its full capacity, and that's where Nintendo might get into some trouble. But I don't see a huge power increase, because one of the big things they're going to want to do is make sure that people who have the original Switch can still play games that come out later. So even if you have this hypothetical Switch Pro, the original Switch users still need to use it, much like PS4 and PS4 Pro, how the PS4 Pro can take advantage of a bit more power, but the older PS4 can still work fine. So I think they're definitely going to look at something like that.
That's a great point. I mean, I think that's partially why I'm not expecting a big upgrade in this sense, as at least power-wise, because it can leave the original Switch user base behind. I think is it 40 million strong now? Am I off base? I have no idea. I don't know what the current install base is. It's big.
It is big.
Right. So all the new games presumably would have to be playable on the original Switch, and they would have to be playable. So I'm not seeing a big upgrade, especially if the PS5. I guess what's the rumor right now? Is it 2020, maybe late 2019 for it?
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing. Late 2019, early 2020. I've even heard some estimates as far out as holiday 2020. But yeah. I don't think there's anything concrete.
I would expect a true Switch upgrade, like a power increase, like Switch Pro, Switch 2, probably not Switch 2, at the soonest a year after the PlayStation 5. So yeah, I'm kind of expecting something. I'm expecting really something, as we've already touched on, I think, along the lines of like the DSi, or I guess actually yeah, the DSi. That's probably the best. That's probably the best version of it. So, or new 3DS if you want to be more modern.
New Switch.
Yeah. I mean, that might be a good way of branding it. It's worked for the 3DS. Just call it the new Switch. It's a little bit vague on what's new about it, but so I mean, I guess here's a point. Do you think this will replace the existing Switch? Whatever this is, do you think it will replace the original version, much as the DS Lite arguably did for the DS, and really even the new 3DS did to the 3DS?
Not at all. I don't think that the Switch Pro, Switch 2, Switch XL, new Switch, whatever you want to call it, will replace the existing model. In fact, I think the existing model will shift down in price to kind of fill that gap that John was mentioning, make it more appealing to children and people with, tighter budgets. So I think we'll see the Switch original, or whatever they choose to brand it as, at maybe $199 and then see the new improved model at $299, which would be, I think, the smart move to just make the new, better model occupy the same price point that we're all kind of used to.
Yeah, I agree with Steve there. I guess it makes the most sense to make the current Switch the cheapest one to manufacture, the one they have millions of units ready to ship. It makes sense to make that the cheap one. And it does make more sense to make this new one the more expensive model. So, yeah, I think they could probably sell the current Switch without a dock in the future, and just have that being the cheapest model available. And then maybe having a docked version, and then maybe a Pro version. So, yeah, I agree with Steve. That's probably the best way to take things.
So do you think, so I know you guys have been calling it this a Pro. Do you think this actually will be a Pro, like Nintendo's version of a Pro model of Switch?
I think it'd be the closest thing. I mean, we've already said you can't really change the form factor that much, and you can't... I mean, how are they going to do anything apart from put a better chip in there? Like, unless you make the Switch longer but not taller. that looked really strange.
I'm totally picturing the GameCube keyboard controller now.
Oh god.
You can use for Phantasy Star Online.
So, yeah, I do think that they're going to make it more powerful, and maybe make the original one the cheap one. Because all you can really do is put an X2 in there, unless they have like even less powerful chips. But then there's games already struggling on the current hardware.
Oh yeah, no, there's no way it's going to be less powerful. That's for sure.
Right.
I wonder if they do use an improved chip, which I think they will. If they'll use it more for the battery gains from it versus the actual power gains.
So I kind of think that we'll get a twofold effect. We will get some battery gains, but I do believe that we'll see marginal improvements in existing games. I mean, because as great as games like Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey look, they don't always run exactly perfectly. I mean, just take one trip to the Sacred Forest in Breath of the Wild and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about.
Or even New Donk City in Mario Odyssey has.
Right, there are moments where even the best Nintendo Switch games take a performance hit. So I could see this just bringing more consistent performance to existing games and giving developers just that little bit of extra headroom to make their games run more smoothly, if not more beautifully.
Right. That would complicate things a little bit from a development standpoint, because already they have to deal with basically two versions of their game. This would add a third one to it, or potentially a fourth if you're counting the dock mode as well. That also is upgraded. So yeah, so they have potentially 4 versions of their game now. They have to do quality control on.
Yeah, that's true. I guess another question is, we know the Switch is very optimized in its UI, and it runs at something like 50 kilobytes or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah, something stupid small.
So, do we think if they made a revised version with more power, do you think that some of the online components from the Nintendo Switch Online app would be migrated into the system if it has more power?
No.
Just a flat out no? Is that possible for everyone?
I don't see how, because if you're playing against someone... I mean, unless they actually incorporate the app itself into the Switch... I don't see how they could, because they maintain compatibility with the app for all the existing Switch owners. I think they're pretty much locked in. Like, the only way they could migrate is if they mandated future games don't use the app and use, whatever built-in solution they have. But they'll have to work on Switches across the board, so I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Andre. When I was approached to join you guys for this discussion, that was one of the first things I thought was I would love for Switch Online to be integrated into a new console. And so I started doing some homework on it, and I found some quotes from Reggie where he explained Nintendo's admittedly funny thinking about this situation, in which he said, you're not going to take a headset to the park, you're not going to take it on the train, so we built this phone app.
These were recent comments too, like 2 days ago or something.
Right.
So
who is using Nintendo Switch Online app in the park? Like, who are these people?
Who is using Nintendo Switch Online app, period?
Ouch.
Sorry, Nintendo.
So here's a question then for you guys. What other expectations or hopes would you have for this model of Switch? We've already covered, I think, the main points, but there are a few more things that they could improve, I think, and I'll throw out one right here. The stand. That stand is garbage on the current Switch, and I want one where we can actually adjust the angle where it doesn't fall over if you breathe on it. Steve and I were playing Super Mario Party last night, and I was trying to set it up on my ottoman. It's a pretty level surface. It's a soft surface, pretty level. I cannot get that damn thing to stand up. It just toppled over constantly. So I want a true adjustable stand on whatever Switch model this is.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's all kinds of third-party solutions, which just tells you how bad the original design is, because you can spend anywhere between $5 and $50 to fix the problem.
One more thing they could expand upon is the internal storage. And I know it's quite easy just to get a micro SD card, but hearing 32 gigabytes is a very poor selling point, and I think if you just have a higher number on there, that might encourage a few more people just to be a bit more excited about buying the system. Because some games are like 30 gigabytes, and that takes up the majority of your storage. And I'm pretty sure some games take up more than that, so it makes more sense to have at least 64 gigabytes, or more than that maybe.
If they could get up there and just even breach 100, that'd be great. I mean, because here's the thing, I just bought a 400 gigabyte micro SD card. They have to be able to get some sort of internal storage up there, like get it increased way beyond 32 gigs. So I think hopefully increasing the internal storage would be a big point for them. Otherwise, do you think they wouldn't improve the screen at all?
So here's the tricky thing with the screen. Apparently, I haven't seen this myself, but from what I understand, is as with like the 3DS and pretty much all of Nintendo's handhelds, there's different types of screens. So I have a Gen 1 screen, or the first, the early units. Apparently those had the best type of screens, whereas the newer ones, from what I've heard, are cheaper and don't look as good as the models we have.
Oh.
And I think we all have. So in that case, yes, they absolutely could improve it. But going off the original model that I have, I think the screen's great. Like, it still looks good to me. I don't know how. I mean, I'm sure they could improve it. I don't know how you could really sell that though as being a notable increase or improvement without increasing the physical size itself by reducing the bezel.
Yeah.
I don't think a better screen is an exciting selling point. I know Apple often go like, they put a buzzword on there by calling it a Retina display.
Right.
But Sony's tried that with the Vita. They went as an OLED screen, and no one really cared that much. It was a selling point, but it isn't something that really gets people excited. So they'll no doubt have a better screen, but whether it's going to be a big selling point for the system, I don't really think so.
Any other things you would hope from the next model Switch?
That's what makes it so difficult for me, is that I'm not much of a hardware guy. I just sort of get the system and see what they go for. I don't really think like, oh, they could do this, they could do that. It's too much tech that just goes way over my head. So as a layman, I really can't think of outside of the stuff we've already mentioned, stuff that I would like to see improved over the Switch. I think the Switch, on the whole, for what it is a pretty good piece of hardware. And there's some minor things we can improve, like the chip and the stand and the internal storage and all that stuff we've mentioned. But overall, that's what makes this upgrade so strange to me. Is like I can't figure out beyond that what I would want improved.
I mean, that is kind of a good point. Like, I feel like for me personally, the only major selling point I could think that would make me really want to buy a new Switch would be more power. Like, that's really the only thing that would really speak to me, I think. But then again, they may not be targeting us. We already own Switches. They might be going for the people that don't own Switches currently. So, in which case, that may not matter.
Yeah, so conversely from Derek, I'm a huge hardware guy. I buy a ridiculous amount of stupid things I don't need. But I would love to see a Switch that was built, frankly, using more premium materials. I mean, I do have the latest and greatest Apple stuff and all that kind of geeky stuff, but I would love to see a Switch with, for instance, and I know some people are going to groan that I say this, but a glass screen. It just looks really nice. It feels nice in the hand too, especially when you're using touch controls. It feels better than the plastic screen that ships on the Switch currently. I would love to see a thinner device. I mean, just because right now the Switch, as small as it is, still isn't really pocketable, and I know I even cringe at the thought of putting my Switch in my pocket.
Yeah, I made a video about it. You can do it. It's
possible.
You can do it. I mean, Steven Totillo did it with a Wii U gamepad, so...
With his hammer pants.
Yeah.
You can't really make the Switch thinner without also making the Joy-Con thinner, because they match each other perfectly.
And then also the dock, it'll be a lot looser in the dock.
That's
exactly
a very good point. I didn't even think about the dock.
That actually is a good point. If they want to maintain compatibility, it has to be roughly the same shape as it is now, same size.
I think they can change the dock, though, because as it is, the dock isn't the best designed bit of hardware in the world. I mean, it scratches some people's screens. You can't really get much worse than that.
Thank you.
So I reckon they probably could have a redesigned dock, but I'm still fairly certain the Joy-Con can't leave, though. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they will do a mini unit with new controllers attached. But I think it just closes off so many games, and the potential of those games too. So yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they will have no Joy-Con, but I'm pretty sure they will.
I mean, I totally agree with you. On the other hand, it's the same company that removed 3D from their 3DS, so...
Yeah, you can never tell with Nintendo. They make the least reasonable move and somehow make it work. So, I mean, I think any option is on the table for them. I would love to see a thinner, lighter Switch, but I definitely don't want to lose the Joy-Con. Of all the Nintendo gimmicks introduced over the last 20 years, the Joy-Con are easily my favorite.
Yeah. So I guess overall, guys, I think we've covered most of the minutiae we can about this. How are you feeling overall about the announcement of a new Switch coming? Granted, we don't know much about it yet, so it's not really fair to judge too much, but we know it's coming. Nintendo probably wishes we didn't, because I've already heard some people saying they're going to hold off on buying a Switch now. But yeah, what do you think? Like, are you excited for a new model? Do you not care? Are you totally satiated with your current Switch? What's your gut level reaction on this?
I like the current Switch a lot. I think they've gotten to the point where, in power-wise, they can kind of have that level of diminishing returns, where it's obviously a lot less powerful than PlayStation 4, but games still look really good on a portable display. And I'm not really that fussed about more power. I'm pretty satisfied with what I have now, outside of just a few games, like Wolfenstein. But as a whole, yeah, I love the Switch as it is, and while I probably will buy a more powerful version, it's not something that, like, at the top of my list. I'm pretty comfortable with what we have right now.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement. I mean, unless they come out with something that really, like, ooh, that'd be really useful, or I guess I should have that for work. I don't really think I need to bother. It's one of the, even for people who, like, yeah, you might want to hold off on a Switch, but it's still like a year away. Do you really want to wait a year? I mean, if you can, great, but otherwise, I don't think there's any reason to hold off on buying a Switch. Or if you just bought a Switch, I don't think you made a poor decision, because I really don't think whatever this new iteration is going to be that exciting. I think it's going to be fine. I think it might draw in some new people. It'll keep the Switch in people's minds, but it won't be a necessity.
Do people really want to wait 6 months to a year to play Smash Brothers Ultimate?
Exactly.
As someone who has played a whopping 30 minutes of it, I can tell you that I am hyped. I'm not going to lie. It's a new Nintendo piece of hardware. I get butterflies thinking about it. That fanboy part of me will never change no matter how long I am in this industry. But if you're going to buy a Switch, don't wait. It's a fantastic console. It's easily one of the best Nintendo has ever put out. It might be my favorite of all time. But that said, new hardware on the horizon is always an exciting prospect. Time will tell whether it's a Pro or a Lite or what they do with it. I do anticipate that it'll have increased power, and if that's the case, I'm all in.
Nice. Yeah, I kind of feel similar to Steve. Like, I'm not super psyched, but I am excited. Like, I am looking forward to it. I just want to know what it is at this point. What is it?
It's NX.
Yeah, God, wouldn't that be something? The thing is, too, like, the funny thing is, like, like, historically as a kid, like, I was all about new Nintendo hardware. Like, I'd buy every version of everything. But then at some point, that stopped for me. It started with the DS. I got the DS Lite, then I never upgraded beyond that. And then even with the 3DS, even though I got... Well, actually, this is a quite fair comparison. I got shipped every version of it from Nintendo. Except I still had to use the original 3DS because of the capture hardware I paid to have installed.
Yep.
So, for the most part, I've used, the original version or the first upgrade for it, being, the DS Lite or the GBASP. So, I'll be curious to see where I fall on the new Switch, see how big of an improvement it really is. So I guess my final question then for you guys is, when do you expect we'll see this? The report put out, second half of next year, and I believe the author of the report specifically said we could see it as early as summer. Where do you fall on this? Do you think we'll see it by summer? And also, what price do you think they might aim for this thing?
So, as I mentioned before, I think we're going to hit $299. I fully anticipate that the original Switch will be moved down in price, and the new Switch will occupy that slot. I think that we'll see it at E3 2019 in their traditional pre-E3 Direct, just to take the wind out of Sony and Microsoft sales a little bit, but I don't think we'll see the actual product on store shelves until holiday.
Okay.
I think we'll see it around the time of Pokemon, and I say that because new 3DS launched with Monster Hunter and Majora's Mask 3D. So I think to push new hardware, you kind of need new software, and if they're advertising Gen 8 Pokemon alongside this Switch, with it all in all the advertisements, I think that's going to be a really good push. So I think whenever Pokemon launches is when we should expect this Switch. So probably around October of next year.
So you actually brought up something I wanted to touch on, so sorry, Derek, before we get to you. Is that if they are tying this into Pokemon, but that's a thought I had too. That's going to be a big game next year. The next mainline game people are looking forward to, beyond Let's Go. If they are like they are like kind of selling them together. Do you think this might be a more kid-friendly version of the Switch? One of them it's maybe more robust, like the 2DS version to the 3DS?
Not really. I mean, they could go the handheld focus and whatnot. They could try to make it a little bit beefier in order to handle kids, but I don't think it's a necessity. Kids know
They
how
could
to
use the plastic from the original Game Boy.
Yeah, exactly. Because kids are used to iPads and crap now. They are so
That's true.
tech savvy. It does not matter. And I think, yeah, you're going to be marketing to the crowd the fact that, hey, Gen 8 is coming. Here's a new Switch that you can play it on, and even better, here's a bundle with Gen 8 and this new Switch. But I agree. It's probably going to come out around October-ish, maybe early November. Slotted in there right before Pokemon gets out, but definitely before Black Friday and the holidays sales and all that. But I do agree with Steve, though, as far as price. It'll be $300. The previous Switch will go down in price, and that'll be that. I honestly, I'm not expecting, like, huge things out of this. It's just, okay, there's another iteration. There you go.
I think I'm expecting a slightly earlier release date than you guys, but I'm looking at their history for the 3DS specifically, and even the DS. And most of their revisions launched between March and August, with the latest being the 2DS in October. So I think we actually will get maybe a late summer, early fall for this thing. Especially with how the Switch is already following a launch cycle closer to the handhelds, with it launching in March itself. So I think we'll see it before holidays, with it being ready, for the holidays. So
Very possible.
Kids will generally buy things that are targeted at people older than them. And I think you can actually use the Pro Switch in all your advertisements and have it during the Pokemon ads, and the kids will still be interested. They might not buy that version, but it'll get them interested in the Switch. So even if they can't afford the Pro version, I think you can still have it launch around the time of Pokemon, and they'll just go for the cheaper one. So yeah, I still kind of think they need to launch it with a big game. I don't think it's going to matter that much if it's a kid-friendly game they're advertising it for, even if it's the more expensive version, because kids will still want it.
building off of that real quick and tying back into a question I had earlier, if this may be like a more kid-friendly Switch, I'm going to shoot down my own question myself, because I don't think they will, because I think Nintendo's done a great job making the Switch feel like a mature product. And I think by releasing a kid-friendly or kid-focused version of it would work against that. Because I think even the 3DS, even though it did reach a wide demographic, I think it always had, I don't want to call it a stigma, but I think people always look at it as more of a child's toy, whereas the Switch definitely doesn't have that in my experience.
Right, the Switch feels much more like a tablet than a children's product.
Right.
It feels like it's in line with an iPad or even an iPhone or something like that, and that it's a very personal device, and it's designed in such a way that adults would not be embarrassed to pull this thing out in public and use it. I see people all the time on trains or in public walking around with their Switch out, whereas I think there's a certain stigma around doing the same with a 3DS. Like, people just, you don't see them doing that out in public very often.
I don't even know the last time I saw a 3DS out in public, so...
I think Sony and Microsoft have been really clever about marketing their cheaper versions. So the PlayStation 4 Slim and the Xbox One S are technically the cheaper versions that most kids will get, but they're not called, like, they don't look cheap, they don't feel cheap. Whereas Nintendo with the 2DS, that's clearly the cheaper version, and that's the one kids most likely will buy. But I don't think 2DS is necessarily as exciting of a name as Xbox One S. So maybe the solution is to still make it feel adult, but with the shortcomings of a cheaper unit.
We'll see. So many questions. So I think that about wraps it up for us here, guys. Thank you for listening. Before we wrap it up, Steve, can you tell us where people can find you at?
Absolutely, you can find me living the life Nintendo every day at nintendolife.com. Follow me on Twitter at Steve M. Bowling, and yeah, that's it. I don't do anything else.
Well, and you were just published on IGN, though, right? So...
I was. I was hoping Ash was here so we could talk a little bit about Mega Man. I did the top 10 Mega Man bosses for IGN, and nobody likes that list.
We'll see how Ash feels, but don't worry, Ash is always down to talk Mega Man. So, and you'll find links to all of that in the description below. And with that, we're about done here. So thanks for watching, and of course, stay tuned to GameXplain for lots more about the Nintendo Switch, including whatever this ends up being, and everything else Nintendo as well. We'll catch you later. Bye.